My name is Samantha Mitchell, and I'm 26 years old. Right now, I'm standing outside the iron gates of my childhood home, watching luxury cars stream through the entrance to my brother's $500,000 wedding celebration. 3 weeks ago, my parents sent me a certified letter explicitly banning me from attending. In my trembling hand, I'm holding a crumpled invitation that arrived by mistake according to my mother's cold voicemail. My phone keeps buzzing with messages from an unknown number, someone claiming they can give me something that will change everything. But what this mysterious caller just revealed about my family's darkest secrets is about to destroy them all. Before we dive into this story of betrayal and revenge, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're ready to hear how I brought down my own family's empire of lies, hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking family drama stories. Trust me, what happens next will leave you speechless about how far some people will go to protect their perfect image. Growing up in the Mitchell household meant living in the shadow of perfection that was my brother Derek. While I struggled for even the smallest acknowledgement, Derek basked in the endless praise and financial support from our parents, Margaret and Richard Mitchell. My mother, a socialite obsessed with maintaining our family's pristine reputation in the community, and my father, a successful real estate mogul, had made it crystal clear from early childhood that Derek was their golden child and I was merely an afterthought. Every achievement I earned through blood, sweat, and tears was minimized or ignored entirely, while Derek's failures were not only covered up but transformed into victories through my parents' endless resources and connections. The pattern started early and only intensified as we grew older. When Derek cheated his way through college, my parents donated $50,000 to the university to ensure the scandal disappeared without a trace. When I earned a full scholarship to medical school through years of academic excellence, my mother's only comment was questioning whether I was truly ready for such responsibility. Derek received a $15 million trust fund on his 21st birthday, complete with a celebration that made headlines in the society pages. On my 21st birthday, I received a card with a $50 gift certificate to a department store. The message was clear. Derek was the heir to the Mitchell fortune and legacy, while I was expected to be grateful for whatever scraps they decided to throw my way. The situation reached a breaking point when Derek announced his engagement to Bethany Crawford, the daughter of a prominent senator. My parents immediately began planning the most extravagant wedding our social circle had ever witnessed, sparing no expense to ensure it would cement the Mitchell family's position among the elite. Margaret spent months coordinating with the finest vendors money could buy, transforming our family estate into something resembling a royal palace. Meanwhile, I was working double shifts at the local hospital to pay off my medical school loans I had to take despite my family's vast wealth because my parents refused to help with my education expenses. The final insult came just 3 weeks before the wedding when my parents delivered their ultimatum. During what I thought would be a family dinner, Richard looked me directly in the eye and declared that my presence at Derek's wedding would be an embarrassment to the family name. Margaret added that they had already told their friends and extended family that I was traveling abroad for work and wouldn't be able to attend. The lie was so casual, so effortlessly delivered, that it took my breath away. They had erased me from my own brother's wedding without a second thought, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenient detail to be managed. That night, I received the first attack in what would become an all-out war. At the country club's monthly gala, my parents publicly announced Derek as their only child while surrounded by 300 of the city's most influential people. I learned about this humiliation secondhand through my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, who called me in tears to describe the shocked faces of family friends who knew I existed. The message was unmistakable: I was no longer considered part of the Mitchell family in any meaningful way. My parents had decided to erase me from their narrative entirely, and they were willing to do it publicly to ensure there was no confusion about my status in their lives. The emotional devastation of that moment was unlike anything I had ever experienced. These weren't strangers rejecting me, but the people who were supposed to love and protect me unconditionally. Instead, they had weaponized their social status and financial power to cut me out of their lives completely, all to maintain the illusion that Derek was their perfect and only child. As I sat alone in my tiny apartment that night, I couldn't have imagined that their cruelty was about to set in motion events that would expose secrets far darker than simple favoritism. The phone call that changed everything came at 2 in the morning, just as I was falling into another restless sleep haunted by images of the wedding I was banned from attending. The voice on the other end belonged to Hannah Rodriguez, a private investigator who had been tracking my family's business dealings for the past 6 months. Her words sent chills down my spine as she explained that an anonymous whistleblower had been feeding her information about illegal activities involving Mitchell Real Estate Holdings, activities that went far beyond simple tax evasion or minor business violations. According to Hannah's investigation, my father had been using his real estate empire as a front for an elaborate money laundering operation, and my golden child brother Derek wasn't just aware of these crimes but actively participating as the public face of their fraudulent schemes. The evidence Hannah described was staggering in its scope and sophistication. For years, my father had been creating fake real estate deals involving non-existent medical facilities, using my family's reputation in healthcare through my medical background to legitimize these fictional investments. Elderly investors were being convinced to pour their life savings into these properties, believing they were contributing to cutting-edge medical research facilities and assisted living communities. Instead, their money was being funneled through a complex network of offshore accounts before being used to fund my family's lavish lifestyle and legitimate business ventures. The $500,000 wedding I was banned from attending wasn't just a celebration of Derek's engagement, but a monument to financial crimes that had destroyed dozens of innocent families. Hannah's proposal was both tempting and terrifying. In exchange for my help in gathering inside information about the family business, she would ensure that I received evidence proving my rightful claim to the family inheritance, money that legally belonged to me but had been systematically stolen through fraudulent legal maneuvers. More importantly, she offered me something I had been craving my entire life: the chance to see justice served against the people who had treated me as disposable while using their criminal enterprise to maintain their perfect public image. The decision to meet with her felt like stepping off a cliff, but after years of being invisible and powerless in my own family, the opportunity to finally fight back was irresistible. Our first meeting took place in a small diner in Cedar Falls, exactly 200 miles away from the Mitchell family estate. Hannah was nothing like I had expected from a private investigator, appearing more like a successful businesswoman than someone who spent their time exposing corporate criminals. As she spread documents across the worn Formica table, the scope of my family's deception became impossible to ignore. Bank records showed millions of dollars flowing through accounts I had never heard of, all connected to medical facility projects that existed only on paper. Patient files bearing my name and medical credentials had been forged to justify these investments, meaning my own professional reputation had been weaponized without my knowledge to defraud innocent victims. The most shocking revelation came when Hannah revealed that someone inside my family had been secretly cooperating with her investigation for months. This unnamed source had provided detailed financial records, recorded conversations, and insider knowledge that would have been impossible to obtain from outside the organization. As I stared at copies of emails and bank transfers that painted a clear picture of systematic fraud, I realized that my family's perfect facade was already cracking from within. Someone close to the heart of the Mitchell empire had grown tired of the lies and was ready to see justice served, even if it meant destroying everything my parents had built. However, my decision to help Hannah came with immediate and severe consequences. Within days of our meeting, my parents implemented the second major attack in their campaign to control and punish me. Without warning or explanation, they froze my access to the modest trust fund that had been set up for my education expenses, claiming concerns about my behavioral patterns and poor decision-making. This action left me unable to pay rent or cover basic living expenses, forcing me to rely on credit cards and emergency loans just to survive. The timing was clearly designed to pressure me into compliance, a warning that any attempt to challenge their authority would result in complete financial devastation. But what my parents didn't understand was that their cruelty had finally pushed me past the point of caring about their threats and punishments. Armed with Hannah's intelligence and driven by years of accumulated rage, I began my transformation from passive victim to active investigator. Using my medical credentials and knowledge of the family business structure, I managed to gain access to Mitchell real estate holdings under the pretense of reviewing patient files for a research project. My parents had always dismissed my medical career as insignificant compared to Derek's business acumen, never imagining that my expertise would give me the perfect cover for examining their criminal enterprise from the inside. What I discovered in those sterile office buildings went beyond even Hannah's most pessimistic estimates, revealing a web of fraud so extensive that it had been systematically destroying lives for over a decade. The fake patient files were masterpieces of medical forgery, complete with detailed case histories, treatment plans, and outcome projections that would have convinced even experienced healthcare professionals. These documents were being used to justify the construction of specialized medical facilities that would never be built, convincing investors that they were contributing to groundbreaking research and patient care. Seeing my own name and credentials attached to these fraudulent documents felt like a violation that cut deeper than any childhood rejection or family betrayal. My parents had not only stolen money from innocent victims but had used my professional identity as a weapon in their criminal enterprise, potentially destroying my career if their crimes were ever exposed. My investigation led me to Marcus Chen, the former family accountant who had been abruptly fired 6 months earlier for asking too many questions about discrepancies in the company's financial records. Marcus had kept copies of everything, driven by a combination of professional ethics and personal suspicion that something criminal was happening under his watch. His records painted a horrifying picture of systematic exploitation targeting the most vulnerable members of society, elderly investors approaching retirement, recent immigrants unfamiliar with American financial systems, and families seeking medical solutions for desperately ill relatives. The total amount stolen exceeded $30 million, money that represented the life savings, retirement funds, and medical treatment funds of over 200 families. The most devastating discovery was learning that Derek wasn't simply an unwitting front man for my father's criminal activities but an active recruiter who had been deliberately targeting victims through his social connections and charm. Armed with inside knowledge of their financial situations and personal vulnerabilities, Derek had been systematically identifying and manipulating people into making investments they couldn't afford to lose. His engagement to Senator Crawford's daughter wasn't just a social coup but a strategic move to gain access to wealthy political families who would be prime targets for their sophisticated fraud schemes. The wedding I was banned from attending was being funded directly by money stolen from victims, including Mrs. Eleanor Kim, my childhood piano teacher who had lost her entire life savings to one of Derek's investment pitches. As the scope of the crimes became clear, I experienced an emotional breakdown that lasted for days. Learning that my family's wealth and status had been built on the systematic destruction of innocent lives shattered any remaining illusions I had about their character or morality. These weren't victimless financial crimes or minor tax evasion schemes, but deliberate and calculated attacks on people who trusted the Mitchell family name and reputation. The elderly investors who had been convinced to hand over their retirement savings, the immigrant families who had sacrificed everything for medical treatments that would never materialize, the desperate parents who had mortgaged their homes to pay for their children's care. These were real people whose lives had been destroyed to fund my family's lavish lifestyle and social status. Working with Hannah and Marcus, we began developing a comprehensive plan to expose the truth and ensure that my family faced justice for their crimes. Hannah's media contacts were prepared to break the story once we had sufficient evidence to guarantee convictions, while Marcus's financial expertise would be crucial in tracing the money trail and identifying all the victims who deserved restitution. My role would be to maintain access to inside information while documenting ongoing criminal activities, using my position as the forgotten daughter to gather evidence that would be impossible to obtain any other way. We knew that my family would fight back with everything at their disposal once they realized what was happening, but the scope of their crimes made exposure inevitable. The third attack came just as we were finalizing our evidence-gathering strategy. Derek, somehow sensing that I posed a threat to his perfect life, orchestrated a sophisticated setup designed to destroy my credibility and freedom. Using his connections in law enforcement and his intimate knowledge of my daily routine, he planted illegal substances in my apartment and then called in an anonymous tip about my alleged drug problems. When police arrived for a wellness check, they discovered the planted evidence and nearly arrested me on serious felony charges. Only quick thinking and the intervention of a sympathetic officer who knew me from my hospital work prevented me from being taken into custody, but the message was clear: my family was prepared to destroy my life completely if I threatened their criminal enterprise. The morning of Derek's $500,000 wedding arrived with the kind of pristine autumn weather that seemed designed for fairy tale celebrations. From my position 200 miles away, I watched through Hannah's surveillance equipment as guests began arriving at the Mitchell family estate in an endless parade of luxury vehicles and designer attire. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was seeing more of my brother's wedding through hidden cameras than I would have experienced as an invited guest, but the knowledge of what was really being celebrated turned my stomach with each passing moment. This wasn't just a union between two young people in love, but a criminal enterprise disguised as a social event, funded by money stolen from victims whose names the guests would never know. Hannah's team had been monitoring communications all week, and what they discovered sent urgent alerts through our entire operation. Derek and my father weren't just planning to celebrate the wedding and return to business as usual. Instead, they had orchestrated an elaborate exit strategy that would allow them to disappear with millions in offshore accounts immediately following the ceremony. The wedding gifts, many of them substantial checks from wealthy political families, were being processed through the same fraudulent accounts used in their money laundering operation. By the time guests realized what had happened, Derek and Bethany would be on their honeymoon in a country with no extradition treaty, leaving behind a trail of victims and evidence that would be impossible to untangle. The revelation that James Morrison, our longtime family lawyer, had been working as an FBI informant for the past 2 years added another layer of complexity to an already dangerous situation. James had been carefully documenting every illegal transaction and conversation while maintaining the appearance of loyal service to the Mitchell family interests. His inside access had made much of Hannah's investigation possible, but it also meant that federal authorities were preparing their own operation that could interfere with our plans to expose the truth publicly. The realization that multiple investigations were converging on the same day created an atmosphere of barely controlled chaos as different agencies and interests competed for control of the situation. As I watched the wedding preparations unfold through our surveillance network, I was forced to make the most difficult decision of my life. I could remain safely hidden 200 miles away and let federal authorities handle the arrests and exposure, protecting myself from any potential retaliation or legal complications. Or I could return to the family estate and confront my parents and brother directly, using the element of surprise to gather final pieces of evidence and ensure that their victims received the public acknowledgement they deserved. The rational choice was obvious, but the emotional need to finally stand up to the people who had destroyed my life and the lives of so many others proved impossible to resist. Using knowledge of the estate's service entrances that dated back to childhood games of hide and seek, I managed to infiltrate the wedding celebration without being detected by security. The contrast between the lavish decorations and elegant atmosphere and my knowledge of how it was all funded created a surreal experience that felt like walking through a beautiful nightmare. Hundreds of guests celebrated and danced, completely unaware that they were participating in what amounted to a victory party for criminal activity. The money that had paid for the flowers, food, and entertainment belonged to families who were struggling to survive after being systematically defrauded by the people they had trusted most. My confrontation with Margaret in the bridal suite was the first time I had seen my mother in weeks, and the transformation in her appearance was shocking. The stress of maintaining their criminal enterprise while planning the perfect wedding had taken a visible toll, aging her far beyond her years and leaving her with a haunted expression that no amount of expensive makeup could completely disguise. When she realized I was standing in her daughter-in-law's preparation room, her immediate reaction wasn't surprise or anger but pure terror that her carefully constructed world was about to collapse around her. Her threats to have me committed to a psychiatric facility represented the fourth major attack in their campaign against me. But for the first time, her words carried no power to hurt or intimidate me. The final betrayal came when Derek revealed that he had been aware of my investigation from the very beginning and had been deliberately feeding false information to derail our efforts. His network of connections in law enforcement and business had kept him informed about Hannah's investigation, Marcus's cooperation, and even my secret meetings with federal authorities. The smile on his face as he explained how he had manipulated every aspect of our operation was the kind of cold satisfaction that could only come from someone who genuinely enjoyed destroying other people's lives. But what Derek didn't realize was that his overconfidence had led him to reveal information that proved his guilt beyond any possible doubt, information that was being recorded by equipment he knew nothing about. The moment I walked into Derek's wedding reception felt like stepping into the eye of a hurricane that was about to devastate everything in its path. 300 of the city's most influential people were celebrating what they believed was the union of two prominent families, completely unaware that they were about to witness the public destruction of one of their community's most respected institutions. My decision to confront Derek during the reception wasn't strategic or carefully planned, but driven by years of accumulated rage and the knowledge that this might be my only opportunity to force my family to face the consequences of their actions in front of the people whose opinions they valued most. Standing before the assembled crowd of politicians, business leaders, and socialites, I began recounting the evidence of Derek's criminal activities and my parents' systematic cover-up of their fraud schemes. The initial reaction was shocked silence as guests struggled to process accusations that seemed impossible to reconcile with the Mitchell family's pristine reputation. I described the elderly investors who had lost their life savings, the immigrant families who had sacrificed everything for medical treatments that would never materialize, and the cancer patients who had been convinced to spend their final resources on fraudulent clinical trials. Each revelation sent visible waves of discomfort and disbelief through the crowd as the scope and cruelty of the crimes became impossible to ignore. Derek's counterattack was swift and vicious, relying on years of practiced manipulation and his intimate knowledge of my vulnerabilities. He portrayed me as the mentally unstable sister who had always been jealous of his success and had finally snapped under the pressure of her own failures. His description of my alleged drug problems, relationship issues, and psychological instability was delivered with the kind of practiced sincerity that had made him such an effective con artist. Several guests who had known me since childhood began nodding in agreement, their memories apparently rewritten by Derek's convincing performance and their desire to believe that the Mitchell family couldn't possibly be capable of such horrific crimes. My father's intervention represented the pinnacle of his arrogance and sense of entitlement. Rather than addressing any of my accusations or attempting to defend the family's actions through legitimate means, he simply ordered security to remove me from the premises as if I were an uninvited intruder rather than his own daughter. His complete dismissal of my accusations and his obvious confidence that his wealth and social status would protect him from any consequences demonstrated just how completely he had lost touch with reality. The sight of him waving his hand dismissively while discussing my removal with hired security guards crystallized everything that was wrong with my family's relationship with power and accountability. Hannah's arrival with federal agents during the cake-cutting ceremony transformed the elegant wedding reception into a crime scene that would dominate headlines for months. The timing was perfect from a dramatic standpoint but devastating for the innocent guests who found themselves trapped in the middle of a federal investigation. As FBI agents began reading arrest warrants and seizing evidence, the crowd of distinguished guests went from confused murmuring to panicked attempts to distance themselves from the unfolding scandal. Senator Crawford's family was particularly vocal in their shock and outrage, making it clear that Bethany's engagement to Derek was immediately terminated regardless of any legal outcomes. The media frenzy that followed was unlike anything our small city had ever experienced. News trucks and reporters swarmed the estate grounds, transforming the quiet exclusive neighborhood into a chaotic circus of camera crews and satellite dishes. The contrast between the morning's elegant wedding preparations and the afternoon's criminal investigation created compelling visual storytelling that dominated local and national news coverage for weeks. Every major network wanted to interview the daughter who had brought down her own family's criminal empire, but I was too emotionally devastated by the day's events to do anything but watch in stunned silence as my childhood home became the center of a national scandal. Derek's physical attack on me in front of hundreds of witnesses represented both his complete loss of control and his final attempt to silence the truth through violence and intimidation. His fury at being exposed in front of his new wife, his father-in-law, and the entire social elite who had previously celebrated his success transformed him into something barely recognizable as the charming brother I had once admired despite everything. His screamed accusations that I had destroyed everything he had worked for revealed just how completely he had convinced himself that he deserved the wealth and status built on other people's suffering. The fact that he was willing to assault me in front of federal agents and dozens of cameras demonstrated the depth of his delusion about his own invincibility. The discovery of planted evidence in my purse during the chaos represented Derek's most sophisticated and dangerous attack yet. His ability to manipulate the situation even while under federal investigation showed just how prepared he had been for the possibility of exposure. Only the presence of Hannah's cameras and the immediate intervention of federal agents prevented me from being arrested on charges that could have destroyed my credibility and freedom. The realization that Derek had been planning my destruction from multiple angles simultaneously was both terrifying and illuminating, revealing the true extent of his criminal sophistication and complete lack of moral boundaries when it came to protecting his interests. The weeks following Derek's wedding day arrest launched a legal nightmare that consumed every aspect of my existence and tested my resolve in ways I had never imagined possible. The FBI investigation expanded rapidly as agents discovered that the Mitchell family's criminal enterprise was far more extensive than even Hannah's thorough research had revealed. Multiple federal agencies became involved as evidence emerged of tax evasion, securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering schemes that crossed state and international boundaries. My role as a key witness placed me at the center of a legal storm that threatened to destroy what remained of my life even as it promised to deliver the justice I had sought for so long. My testimony became crucial to the prosecution's case, but providing it meant enduring months of depositions, grand jury appearances, and legal proceedings that forced me to relive every painful detail of my family's crimes and betrayals. Federal prosecutors were particularly interested in my inside knowledge of the business operations and my ability to explain the medical fraud that had been central to their schemes. However, my cooperation with authorities made me a target for an increasingly desperate campaign of legal and personal attacks designed to discredit my testimony and intimidate me into recanting my accusations. The legal threats against me came from multiple directions as my family's high-powered attorneys launched a coordinated assault on my credibility and character. They filed false accusation lawsuits claiming I had stolen confidential business information, defamation suits alleging I had deliberately lied to destroy the family reputation, and civil suits demanding millions in damages for lost business opportunities. Each lawsuit required expensive legal representation that I couldn't afford, forcing me to rely on court-appointed attorneys and pro bono legal aid that was stretched thin by the complexity of the case. The financial pressure was deliberately designed to force me into bankruptcy and submission, leaving me unable to continue cooperating with federal prosecutors. The financial warfare reached its peak when my parents successfully implemented a comprehensive strategy to cut off all my resources and support systems. They canceled the health insurance policy that had been covering my medical expenses, closed bank accounts that still had my name attached, and used their influence to interfere with my employment opportunities at local hospitals. Their attorneys argued in court that I had forfeited any rights to family support by making false accusations against my own relatives, and several judges initially seemed sympathetic to their position. The systematic destruction of my financial stability was intended to demonstrate the consequences of challenging their authority and to pressure me into dropping my cooperation with federal authorities. The public humiliation campaign was perhaps the most emotionally devastating aspect of their counterattack. My parents' public relations team worked overtime to portray me as the troubled daughter seeking revenge against the family that had tried to help her overcome mental health and substance abuse problems. Local media outlets suddenly featured stories about my alleged erratic behavior, my supposed jealousy of Derek's success, and my history of making outrageous claims to gain attention. Friends and colleagues who had known me for years began treating me with suspicion and pity, clearly influenced by the constant stream of negative publicity that followed me everywhere I went. Derek's manipulation efforts continued even from his jail cell as he worked to turn our extended family against me through a campaign of lies and emotional blackmail. His phone calls and letters to aunts, uncles, and cousins painted me as the vindictive sister who had destroyed the family's reputation and fortune out of petty jealousy and mental illness. Several family members who had previously been supportive began questioning whether my accusations might be exaggerated or motivated by psychological problems rather than genuine evidence of criminal behavior. The isolation from people who had been part of my support system added another layer of emotional devastation to an already overwhelming situation. The emergence of new evidence regarding Derek's embezzlement from children's charities provided a turning point in both the legal proceedings and public perception of the case. Financial records revealed that he had been systematically stealing funds from organizations dedicated to providing medical care for terminally ill children, using his position on charity boards to redirect donations into his personal accounts. The discovery that Derek had been literally taking money from dying children while maintaining his image as a philanthropic community leader was so shocking that even his strongest supporters began questioning their loyalty. This evidence was particularly damning because it demonstrated a pattern of criminal behavior that extended far beyond business fraud into the realm of pure evil. Bethany Crawford's decision to call off her engagement and cooperate with the federal investigation represented a major victory for the prosecution and a devastating blow to my family's defensive strategy. Her testimony about Derek's attempts to involve her in money laundering schemes and his casual discussions about defrauding investors provided crucial insider evidence that corroborated my own accusations. More importantly, her cooperation sent a clear message to other potential witnesses that they could safely come forward without fear of retaliation from the Mitchell family's remaining influence and resources. The third major betrayal came when my father attempted to frame me for embezzlement using forged documents that purported to show I had been stealing money from the family business for years. These documents were sophisticated enough to pass initial examination and were supported by testimony from bribed employees who claimed to have witnessed my alleged theft. The timing of these accusations was clearly designed to undermine my credibility just as the federal trial was beginning, potentially destroying the prosecution's case and shifting blame for the entire criminal enterprise onto me. Only the intervention of handwriting experts and digital forensics specialists prevented this frame-up from succeeding, but the attempt demonstrated just how far my father was willing to go to protect himself. The near defeat I experienced when my parents successfully sued me for defamation represented the lowest point of the entire legal battle. A sympathetic judge awarded them significant financial damages based on their argument that my accusations had destroyed their business reputation without sufficient evidence to justify the claims. The judgment would have left me financially ruined and legally prohibited from discussing the case publicly, effectively silencing my testimony and allowing my family to escape justice. Only a successful appeal based on new evidence and prosecutorial support prevented this victory from standing, but the months of uncertainty and financial pressure nearly broke my resolve to continue fighting. The discovery that transformed everything came through Hannah's relentless investigation into my father's personal life and financial arrangements. Hidden deep within corporate records and offshore account transfers, she uncovered evidence of Richard's most closely guarded secret, a second family living in California who had been funded for over a decade through money stolen from fraud victims. This revelation wasn't just evidence of personal betrayal but proof of systematic criminal activity that extended far beyond simple business fraud. The documentation showed regular transfers of hundreds of thousands of dollars to support his mistress and their 2 children, money that had been systematically stolen from elderly investors and desperate families seeking medical treatment. Margaret's reaction to learning about her husband's double life and the true source of their wealth created a seismic shift in the family's defensive strategy. For 25 years, she had believed that their lavish lifestyle was supported by legitimate business success, never questioning the source of the money that funded their social status and luxury possessions. The realization that she had been living off the life savings of fraud victims while her husband maintained another family in secret shattered her world completely. Her emotional breakdown was visible and genuine, transforming her from a defensive supporter of the family's innocence into a potential ally for the prosecution seeking justice. Margaret's decision to cooperate with federal authorities in exchange for immunity represented the most significant breakthrough in the entire investigation. Her inside knowledge of family business operations, social connections, and financial arrangements provided prosecutors with evidence that would have been impossible to obtain any other way. More importantly, her testimony carried credibility that my accusations alone could never achieve, coming from someone who had been at the center of the Mitchell family empire for decades. Her willingness to admit her own complicity in covering up criminal activities while pointing to Richard and Derek as the primary architects of the fraud schemes gave prosecutors the corroboration they needed to guarantee convictions. Derek's growing desperation became apparent as he realized that his mother's cooperation had made his legal position hopeless. His attempted flight from the country represented both an admission of guilt and a final demonstration of his complete lack of remorse for the victims of his crimes. Federal agents intercepted him at the airport with over $2 million in cash, money that had been systematically drained from victim restitution accounts in the hours before his planned escape. The sight of Derek being arrested while attempting to flee with stolen money provided compelling evidence of his guilt that no amount of legal maneuvering could explain away. My strategic decision to use my medical knowledge against my father's legal defense proved to be one of the most effective moves in our entire campaign for justice. When Richard's attorneys attempted to argue that he was mentally incompetent to stand trial due to age-related cognitive decline, I was able to provide detailed medical analysis proving that his claimed symptoms were completely fabricated. My professional expertise in neurology and geriatric medicine allowed me to demonstrate that his supposed memory loss and confusion were carefully performed rather than genuine medical conditions. The exposure of this fraudulent defense strategy not only eliminated his primary legal escape route but also demonstrated his continued capacity for sophisticated deception even while facing federal charges. The media transformation that occurred as victim testimonies began dominating news coverage represented a crucial shift in public perception that had been months in the making. Instead of focusing on family drama and personal conflicts, news outlets began featuring detailed stories about the real human cost of the Mitchell family's criminal activities. Elderly couples who had lost their retirement savings, immigrant families who had sacrificed everything for fraudulent medical treatments, and terminally ill patients who had been convinced to spend their final resources on non-existent clinical trials began speaking publicly about their experiences. These testimonies created a powerful narrative that made it impossible for anyone to continue viewing Derek and Richard as sympathetic victims of false accusations. The court's decision to freeze all Mitchell family assets pending the outcome of criminal proceedings represented a major victory for both justice and victim restitution efforts. This action prevented any further attempts to hide money in offshore accounts while ensuring that stolen funds would be available for eventual return to the victims who rightfully owned them. The asset freeze also had the practical effect of eliminating my family's ability to continue funding their expensive legal defense, forcing them to rely on court-appointed attorneys who lacked the resources and motivation to mount the kind of comprehensive defensive strategy they had been employing. Derek's arrest at the airport while attempting to flee the country with $2 million in cash provided the prosecution with perhaps the most damning evidence of consciousness of guilt that any jury could imagine. The money he was carrying had been systematically drained from accounts that were supposed to be held in trust for victim restitution, representing one final attempt to steal from the people whose lives he had already destroyed. His possession of forged identification documents and tickets to a country with no extradition treaty made it impossible for even his most skilled attorneys to argue that his actions were motivated by anything other than guilty knowledge and criminal intent. The revelation of my parents' plan to completely disown me and forge my death certificate represented the most chilling demonstration of their criminal mindset and complete lack of familial feeling. Documents discovered during the federal investigation showed detailed discussions about eliminating me as a potential threat through legal mechanisms that would have made it impossible for me to inherit anything or challenge their actions in the future. The casual nature of these discussions, conducted through emails and recorded phone calls, revealed a level of calculated cruelty that shocked even experienced federal investigators who had seen decades of white-collar crime. This evidence eliminated any remaining sympathy for my parents while demonstrating the lengths they were willing to go to protect their criminal enterprise. The federal trial that determined my family's fate lasted for 3 months and attracted national media attention as one of the most comprehensive white-collar crime prosecutions in recent history. The courtroom was packed daily with victims, their families, journalists, and members of the community who had been shocked by the scope of the Mitchell family's criminal activities. Watching Derek and my father sit at the defendant's table while prosecutor after prosecutor detailed their crimes was both satisfying and heartbreaking, representing the culmination of years of abuse and betrayal but also the final destruction of any possibility for family reconciliation. Derek's 15-year sentence reflected both the severity of his crimes and his complete lack of remorse throughout the trial proceedings. Even when faced with overwhelming evidence and victim testimony that detailed the human cost of his actions, he maintained his innocence and blamed his conviction on prosecutorial misconduct and family betrayal. His final statement to the court focused entirely on his own suffering and lost opportunities rather than acknowledging any responsibility for the dozens of families he had systematically defrauded. The judge's comments during sentencing made it clear that Derek's continued denial of responsibility had influenced the decision to impose the maximum possible penalty under federal sentencing guidelines. Richard's 12-year sentence was accompanied by orders for complete financial restitution and the forfeiture of all assets that could be traced to criminal activity. The judge specifically noted that his role as the architect of the criminal enterprise and his exploitation of his position as a respected community leader had made his crimes particularly egregious. Unlike Derek, Richard did offer a brief apology during his sentencing hearing, but his words carried no genuine emotion or acknowledgement of the specific harm he had caused to individual victims. His visible anger at being held accountable for his actions suggested that he remained focused on his own losses rather than genuinely understanding the impact of his criminal behavior. Margaret's probation sentence in exchange for her cooperation represented a controversial but necessary compromise that allowed prosecutors to secure convictions against the primary architects of the fraud scheme. Her testimony had been crucial to establishing the timeline and scope of criminal activities, but her role as an enabler and beneficiary of the crimes meant that she couldn't escape all consequences for her participation. The conditions of her probation included extensive community service specifically focused on helping victims of financial fraud, a requirement that forced her to confront the real human cost of the lifestyle she had enjoyed for so many years. The asset recovery process ultimately returned $18 million to victims and their families, representing the largest financial restitution in a white-collar crime case in our state's history. While this money couldn't undo the years of financial hardship and emotional trauma that victims had endured, it provided crucial relief for elderly couples facing poverty and medical bills they couldn't afford. The recovery process also revealed additional evidence of criminal activity as forensic accountants traced money through complex networks of shell companies and offshore accounts that had been designed to hide stolen funds permanently. My public vindication came through multiple channels as the full scope of my family's crimes became undeniable and my role in exposing them was recognized by law enforcement and victim advocacy organizations. The district attorney's public apology for the initial skepticism that had greeted my accusations was covered extensively by local and national media, helping to restore my professional reputation and personal credibility. Multiple law enforcement agencies publicly praised my courage in coming forward despite the personal cost and risk involved in challenging my own family's criminal enterprise. The personal cost of seeking justice was severe and lasting, extending far beyond the financial hardship and legal stress that had dominated my life for over 2 years. Many extended family members never forgave me for exposing crimes that destroyed the Mitchell family name and social status, choosing to blame me for the consequences rather than the family members who had committed the actual crimes. Professional relationships were damaged by the constant negative publicity and association with scandal, forcing me to rebuild my medical career from scratch in a different city where my name wasn't immediately associated with criminal proceedings. Derek's final manipulation attempt came through a series of letters from prison in which he continued to blame me for destroying his life and claimed that his criminal activities had been motivated by pressure from our father and the family's financial obligations. These letters were clearly designed to elicit sympathy and potentially reduce his sentence through appeals claiming diminished capacity or coercion. However, his continued focus on his own victimization rather than acknowledging any genuine responsibility for his crimes made it impossible to feel any sympathy for his situation or consider any form of reconciliation. Richard's claims of health problems as grounds for early release represented his final attempt to escape the full consequences of his criminal behavior through manipulation and deception. Medical experts appointed by the court determined that his alleged heart condition was either completely fabricated or significantly exaggerated for legal purposes. His willingness to fake serious illness while actual victims of his crimes struggled with real medical problems funded by the money he had stolen demonstrated a level of selfishness and moral bankruptcy that shocked even experienced corrections officials. The inheritance battle that followed the criminal convictions became a complex legal process that lasted for months as attorneys worked to untangle decades of fraudulent financial transactions and forged legal documents. My eventual success in claiming my rightful share of legitimate family assets was motivated not by personal greed but by the desire to fund additional victim restitution and establish programs to prevent similar financial crimes in the future. The recovery of assets that should have been mine by right provided crucial resources for the foundation I planned to establish in honor of the victims who had suffered because of my family's criminal activities. 2 years have passed since that devastating wedding day when I exposed my family's criminal empire in front of 300 shocked guests, and the transformation in my life has been as dramatic as the fall from grace experienced by Derek and my parents. The immediate aftermath of the trials and convictions left me emotionally and financially drained, struggling to rebuild not just my career but my entire sense of identity and purpose. However, the passage of time and the gradual healing process have allowed me to transform my painful experiences into a foundation for helping others who have faced similar betrayals and financial crimes. My decision to establish a medical practice specializing in elderly care was directly inspired by the stories I learned about my family's victims during the investigation and trial proceedings. Many of the people who had been defrauded were senior citizens who had trusted the Mitchell family name and reputation when making crucial healthcare and financial decisions. By focusing my professional efforts on providing compassionate and affordable care to elderly patients, I've been able to honor the memory of those whose suffering funded my family's criminal lifestyle while building a practice based on genuine service rather than exploitation. The foundation I created using my recovered inheritance has become a national model for supporting victims of financial crimes and educating communities about the warning signs of investment fraud. Working with Hannah Rodriguez and Marcus Chen, who have become some of my closest friends and most trusted advisors, we've developed educational programs that have helped hundreds of families protect themselves from sophisticated fraud schemes. The foundation also provides direct financial assistance to victims of white-collar crime who are struggling with the aftermath of financial devastation. My relationship with Margaret has evolved into something resembling cautious friendship rather than traditional mother-daughter closeness, built on her genuine remorse and commitment to making amends for her role in enabling criminal activities. Her court-ordered community service working with fraud victims has been genuinely transformative, forcing her to confront the real human cost of the lifestyle she had enjoyed without questioning its source. While we will never have the kind of trusting relationship that should exist between mother and daughter, we've found a way to coexist peacefully and even collaborate on victim advocacy efforts. The question of whether to forgive Derek remains the most complex and emotionally challenging aspect of my healing journey. His final letter from prison included what appeared to be a genuine admission of guilt and a request for forgiveness, but his history of manipulation and deception makes it impossible to trust the sincerity of his words. While I've been able to forgive my parents for their failures and crimes, Derek's act of cruelty and his willingness to destroy innocent lives for personal gain has proven much more difficult to overcome. Perhaps forgiveness will come with more time, but for now, I'm focused on honoring his victims rather than absolving him of responsibility. The life lesson that has emerged from this entire devastating experience centers on the realization that sometimes you have to lose your biological family to find your true family among people who genuinely care about your well-being and share your values. Hannah, Marcus, James Morrison, and the victim families I've worked with have provided more genuine support and affection than I ever received from my blood relatives. This chosen family is built on mutual respect and shared commitment to justice rather than obligation and manipulation. Last week, I attended Mrs. Eleanor Kim's 80th birthday party, surrounded by 3 generations of her family who were able to celebrate because the money Derek had stolen from her retirement account was eventually recovered and returned. Watching her blow out candles on a cake she could afford because justice was served provided a sense of satisfaction and purpose that no amount of family wealth or social status could ever match. These are the moments that make all the pain and struggle worthwhile. As I reflect on the journey from that terrible morning when I stood outside my family's gates to this moment of genuine peace and purpose, I understand that real justice isn't about revenge or punishment but about protecting others from experiencing the same harm. The foundation work, the medical practice, and the advocacy efforts all represent ways of transforming personal pain into positive action that honors the victims and prevents future crimes. This morning, I received another letter from a family in another state who believe they've uncovered a similar fraud scheme involving respected community leaders and fraudulent medical investments. Their story sounds heartbreakingly familiar: elderly victims, fake medical facilities, stolen life savings, and a family afraid to come forward because of their attackers' wealth and influence. As I prepare to help them navigate the same journey toward justice that nearly destroyed me, I'm reminded that this work is far from over. The choice to speak out against powerful people who seem untouchable is never easy, but the alternative is allowing them to continue destroying innocent lives while hiding behind their wealth and reputation. Sometimes the cost of staying silent is far higher than the price of seeking justice, even when that justice requires sacrificing everything you once thought mattered. My story proves that ordinary people can defeat sophisticated criminals when they're willing to fight for what's right, regardless of the personal consequences. What would you do if you discovered that your own family was systematically destroying innocent lives to fund their lifestyle? Would you have the courage to speak up if it meant losing everything you'd ever known? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if this story opened your eyes to how financial crimes really affect real families. Subscribe for more true stories about ordinary people who found the courage to fight back against powerful criminals, and share this video with anyone who needs to understand that justice is possible even when it seems hopeless. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that speaking truth to power is never easy, but it's always worth the cost when innocent lives are at stake. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out who you really are and what you're truly capable of achieving.